Hi, Pastor Steve here, and in beautiful Visalia, California, we're having a lovely spring day. Temperatures this morning in the mid 50s, just gorgeous sunshine. I hope wherever you are that the weather is fine, and whether or not it is fine, that inside are doing great. This is our continuing series called Happy Thoughts. Today, we're looking at the subject hindrance to growth in faith, what things keep us from growing as fully as we might in the Christian faith. And I'm going to just dive in to try to be respectful of our time. So, here is a list of things that I have come up with. The first and maybe the most major hindrance of faith is a misconception about what it means to be a person of faith and to grow in it. What I have observed in my years as a pastor and as a practicing Christian is most people hold a very elevated view of what it means to be a Christian, and they look for perfection in not cursing, not drinking to excess, not breaking the law, those kind of things. But they also look towards the type of perfection of never being angry, not letting your humanity show, not being in disagreement with other people, kind of floating along almost on a ethereal cloud through life. So they have an image of a Christian as a perfected being. And that'll stop anybody from even trying to pursue, because most of us know about ourselves. Wow, that's just not in the realm of possibility, right? I struggle with me, and I struggle with some of the same things in my life for years and years and years. I think that's a universal experience. So if you expect that where you're supposed to be is some level of perfection, and you assess yourself honestly, that'll stop your ability or willingness to continue the journey or to try to go forward. Um, I've known some very fine Christians, really people who were just so sweet spirited that they touched my heart, and they had struggles and they had difficulties and they had growing edges also. So the first hindrance is the idea about what we should be once we become a Christian, and our reaction to that very often, when it's too high, very often is simply to cease the journey right away, because we're convinced that we could never arrive there. And in so much as people stay enmeshed in the church and those things, when they're in that situation, they can easily adopt an attitude of functionality while they despair inside that they're still not good enough for God, or that they're not perfected enough for God, those kind of things. So expectations is the first hindrance. The next is churches. The local church is oftentimes a great hindrance to growth in faith. And that's because there are a lot of competing interest in a local church for a pastor or for a team of pastors to deal with. The church is driven by income. The church is driven by attendance. The church is driven by those outward signs that suggest possible health. And if the church begins to panic about its finances, or begins to panic about its attendance on Sunday mornings, in other words, about its popularity and its wealth, it will react by pushing things meant to increase popularity and wealth. And here is the thing with that. When churches get themselves in that situation, then they are not discipling people. And they're not willing to do anything to be unpopular. And discipling people, suggesting to people that really they've a lot of work to do, and that God is not finished with them, and they need to continue the process. That's offensive to many church-going people who are used to the church prostituting itself to be everything that they want it to be. That's a real sickness in Christianity. I have, again, been in large churches and in smaller churches in my time, and the sickness is not identifiable by the size of the congregation. Very large churches often are populist churches that do everything they possibly can to be the cool guy in town. But the truth is, a lot of small churches that don't have the ability to play that game at that level eat themselves up with envy and do everything they can to try to be like the big boys, and try to accommodate consumer-driven Christianity. And all of those things, all of those impulses, all of those kind of really deeply American ideas and ideals, they're counter to growth in faith. They don't disciple people. So American Christianity, in its most popular form, in the megachurch form, and the wannabe megachurch form that's emerging now, My observation is this, that the more the church desires to be the biggest game in town, and to prove its worth by how many millions of dollars it spends on its buildings, or how many people attend their worship services, those kind of things, which is the church is rife with everywhere. Those things produce a church that values shallowness and show more than they do discipleship and the willingness to be changed by the process of God. So a lot of the falling away from the church, and a lot of the losing of its influence in the United States of Christianity is due to the ego, and the confusion and the fear that lives inside pastors who make the decisions on what direction their churches want to go. Now, I know there'll be all kinds of pushback on that. People will say, I know pastors that are whatever. I'm just being plain spoken and honest about the things that I think vex every senior pastor, including me, right? All of my life, I've really had to be brutally honest with myself about what my motivation was for launching different programs or doing different things. Over my time, circumstantially, I really have gotten over the idea that what God wants for me is to be popular or to produce a church that's popular. But it was a lifetime struggle, and I see it in a lot of my colleagues. So the second thing that hinders growth in your Christian faith is the shallowness of the church, and the church wanting you to think of it like Costco or Walmart, right? To come and shop and see if they provide for you the things you want. One last little diatribe on that. The church is full of people who are incensed when the music isn't what they want, or if other elements of worship aren't the way that they are used to, or the way they want. And they very frequently will tell me, right, look, if you don't straighten up and fly right and please me, I'll go someplace else. And really the answer that I used to give is, I'll hold the door for you, right? Off you go. As I've matured some and leaned into grace some more, I've learned to say, look, the church provided for you in your generation, and that meant changes from the way it had been, and we're looking for your generation to sacrifice now so that we can disciple younger generations. Sometimes that conversation goes well, sometimes not, but the whole fact of having that conversation over and over and over reveals the shallow level of disciples of Jesus Christ in the modern day. And people have been trained to be that way by pastors who just will do anything to fill their church up, and anything to make enough money to do so. So that's the second hindrance. The third is, many people don't even have an encounter with Christ or a desire to be any kind of his follower until their life falls apart. So in the midst of divorce or addiction, in the midst of getting yourself in trouble that's about to be revealed in a lot of cases, right? In all kinds of pressures and things that bear, that will bring people to a fervent prayer, right? A desire to make a deal with God effectively, right? If you'll get me out of this or get me through this, then I'll do whatever you want me to do. And that's a very popular notion in Christianity, but it's a notion that fails almost every time. That doesn't produce any depth or change of character or change of person or change of the person's spirit. What it produces is the ego that thinks that you get to bargain with God. So the near disaster conversion through a prayer where the prayer is supposedly answered produces people who are very confused about what their relationship with Christ would be, and they often get to write books and be interviewed on church pulpits, and right, they're the story makers, but what they're pushing is a really eroded and wrong, I think, understanding of what it's like to relate to God. He's not in the business of saving you from your own sins or the recompense that comes with them. He's in the business of trying to transform you into one of his own, and that's a very different mindset. So the quickie conversion, because I'm in a lot of trouble, leading to a misunderstanding of who God is and how things operate, that keeps people at a shallow level for a very long time. On the individual level, here is my observation, again, based on my own experience as a struggling Christian all of my life, and my observation of other Christians. So the things that produce the greatest change in our character and in our temperament and in our really our state of being, which is to say that the things that bring us into discipleship are the most difficult things. It's not singing the songs that you love on Sunday. It's not hearing sermons that you agree with on Sunday. Those things are necessary ingredients in the planting of the seed of faith. But the seed of faith grows through discipleship, right? Through some hard tasks. So in our church, we're really a discipling church above everything else. And in our church, we have programs that are meant to offer to anyone who wants to actually grow in the faith and grow in their knowledge and their sense of the presence of God, the ability to do that. But it's a hard thing. So we front what are called grace groups, and they're accountability groups. And they're not accountability groups for how much scripture you read or how many times you go to church. They're accountability groups for how are you treating your spouse? How are you reacting to your children? What are you doing in the workplace? How are you dealing with people who might be tyrants in your life or who have harmed you, really harmed you? How are you doing on learning to forgive and truly let them go, right? To let go and let God in our church means to give the person up in the process of forgiveness and let God be God, and you get on in a different state of being. Those are very difficult. And most of our people, when they first try a grace group, or they first try the forgiveness challenge, or when they first try another program that we disciple with, which is called Mending the Soul, they stumble and fall, and they are really unhappy because it turns out in order to be changed into a disciple of Christ, you got to follow him for a long time, faithfully trying to live into his teachings, which were about graceful living, about the powerful of forgiveness, about willing to be sacrificial, even when you're dealing with people who you suspect are up to no good, right? To turn the other cheek, to walk the second mile. We try to get people to live into those in accountable ways, because we know that the faithfulness to what Jesus asked of us produces in us the faith that we desire for following Jesus. And it really can't be had in any other way. I guess there are people who have had a one-time event in their life that changes them, but in most of those cases where the change was real, the change was followed quickly by learning to live in an accountability system and learning to play out the things of Christ in their lives, and that produces almost an avenue into us for faith to fill us up. So the biggest hindrance to growth in the faith is people's unwillingness to do the work that is required. Believing is an intellectual exercise. Faith is the willingness to change your life so that it reflects that which you believe. And that takes practice, and it takes practice at difficult things. Let's see what else I've got. I would like whoever watches this to just remember today that your faith is a relationship, a living, ongoing relationship with God, in which God is supposed to be in charge. You're not. So if in your faith life you spend most of your time praying to God and telling him what to do, that's really a broken model. That doesn't work. It may make you feel dependent. It may make you feel religious, but it depends on what you're asking God to do. If you're asking God to change everybody around you, instead of working to forgive them inside your own heart, that's a broken model too. Here is what a healthy relationship with God looks like. You're incessantly asking God to teach you more about grace, to help you model grace, to genuinely and truly forgive people that have harmed you. And your expectation is that the growth will be long and difficult, rewarding, really super rewarding, but the process is difficult. It's like a good marriage. It's like a good friendship. It ebbs and flows, and there are times when you're really engaged and times when you kind of take a breather, but it should be ongoing, and you should have the attitude that it's going to be ongoing. You're going to stay the course and do what God has asked. Lots of things hinder our growth, from the desires, the ego desires of the church and its leaders, to the functionality of the local church just trying to be pleasing and popular, to our own shallowness and willing to misunderstand and misconstrue the character and the quality of the living God, and finally to our unwillingness to do the hard work. You can't learn to play guitar without thousands of hours of practice. You can't learn any valuable skill in life. You might have a penchant for it, but if you're going to be really good at it, you've got to put in the time when nobody else is watching and when it's really difficult. And the same thing is true in your life of faith. You should look for a church that bothers to disciple you. You should look for a church that earnestly strives to help its people grow in the faith, not by their political beliefs and not by popularity and not by a shallow means of call and response, but by a true change in their character, their temperament, and their life. So that's what I know about hindrances to growth in faith. Sadly, I'm an expert having lived through all of them on one side of the aisle or the other. Next week, we'll talk again. I hope this blesses you. If you have comments or things that I didn't think to say or things that you want to add or edit in what I have said, please feel free to put it in the sections. I get those things and I enjoy reading them. God bless you. I'll talk to you again next week.